Hello, students, and welcome back to another Psych 1 lecture. Today we're going to talk about motivation and emotion. And as I've warned you before, and I particularly want to talk about this area again, motivation, emotion, cognition, language, all of these are not isolated areas. They all have interactions with other areas, not only just a couple, three, four, but I have hundreds, thousands, maybe of interactions. So today, when we're talking about motivation and emotion, well, there are so many interacting properties associated with these domains. We're not going to come anywhere near talking about all of them. And in fact, those who have worked on these domains for 30, 40 years, their entire career, and have done extensive research, probably know less than what they know now because their research has generated even more and more questions. So let's proceed with motivation and emotion. And I like this just the beginning of here because these little faces are indications or are expressions that, in fact, all primates, generally speaking, all primates have across the globe. We all express disgust in the same way. We all express joy in the same way, or surprise in the same similar way. And this area, this is well researched. So whether you are a code writer sitting somewhere in Silicon Valley, or whether you're just chilling on the savannah, you will express joy in a very similar way as long as you're a primate. And we humans, we're primates. So let's talk about motivation. Just what is it? Just what is motivation? Well, first of all, MOT. Remember motivation, motor. It motive. There suggests there's some sort of a movement and movement toward. So motivation, dynamics of behavior, the ways actions are initiated, sustained, directed, and terminated. So when one is motivated, there's a need. There's either some sort of an internal deficiency or something that causes a drive. What's a drive? A drive is you're a driver in your car. It's a drive. You want to go forward. You want to get to a destination. A drive. Now, drives are energized emotional states. They are a state that compels an individual to go do something. So, for example, hunger is a basic drive. Thirst is a basic drive. And these drives activate a response. What is a response? A response is an action or series of actions, and mostly a series of actions, designed to attain a goal. And that goal is at the end of that motivation, by the way. What is a goal? The target of motivated behavior. So here you have a little graphic of a very, very basic model of motivation because you've got lots of stuff in between all of these different pathways going on. Remember, we are all a very complex combination of cognition, affect or emotion, and behavior, doing. So, and each one of those has so many other complexities and interactions. So, excuse me, when we talk about a basic model of emotion, needs or expectations, and they result in some sort of a drive. So you have a need, I'm thirsty, results in a drive. I'm going to go get something to drink to achieve a desired goal. Here's a bottle of water, which provides fulfillment. That sure tastes good. I'm no longer thirsty. And then a feedback goes back to my body. Thirst is quenched. Now, of course, that's an extremely simplified motivation. For example, why are you registered to this course? Why are you in this course? What motivates you to spend your time, spend your money, go to Canvas, take these exams, listen to me? What's the deal? There's a motivation there. So think about it. And when you think about it, you will also think that not just one motivation, but there are many other little interacting processes that take place. Maybe motivation from your parents, your siblings, your peers, society in general, YouTube, Facebook, I don't know. Many of them provide models, interacting models of motivation. But everything still has to have an incentive value. So actions are usually energized by a mixture of these needs we have, like thirst or hunger, and some sort of external incentive. So an incentive value is the goal's appeal beyond its ability to fill a need. So I'm thirsty, I go get a drink of water. Now, I might go for the nice sparkling crystal mountain water over maybe some gutter water. But if I'm really, really, really thirsty and the other isn't there, I might just go for the gutter water. But if they're both there, the better water has certainly a greater incentive value. There's an appeal beyond its ability to fill a need. Now you're getting maybe you're going after it for a degree. What does that do for you? What does that do for anybody? Well, it will fill a need somewhere. It's other than your thirst for knowledge. That certainly is a need, and indeed one that I heartily endorse that you fulfill. Other than that, if you follow the strategy that's outlined for you to, let's say, get an AA degree or bachelor's degree, master's, whatever you're after, there's other sorts of incentive, like more money, more recognition in society. Maybe that does something for your self-esteem. Any of these things, incentive value. So now let's talk about some of the types of motives. Obviously, there's a biological motive, and that's innate. It's inborn, and these are based on biological needs, and these have to be met to survive. Then there's a stimulus motive. Now, be careful. There's a big difference between a biological motive and a stimulus motive, although they overlap. And that's needs for stimulation and information. They appear to be innate, but it's not necessarily for survival. Stimulus motives aren't necessarily for survival. And then there's a learned motive. That is something you learned, something that's out there. I am so motivated to save up and get a Maserati. That's a learned motive, and I've just got to have one. I mean, that's an extreme idea, but learned motives. I've got to have an education. I have got to go out and buy a house. I must go out and find a proper mate with whom I can raise a family. Learned needs, drives, and goals. None of these are necessary to survive, except for biological motives. Okay, what are biological motives and homeostasis? So biological drives are central because they maintain homeostasis, and homeostasis is the steady state of body equilibrium. We don't want to get too hot. We don't want to get too cold. We don't want to get so full of water that our pH balance is off, and we certainly don't want to be so extremely hungry. We don't want to eat so much that we destroy our digestive systems and eventually get maybe even diabetes too, something like that, ruin your joints, ruin your and get sick and have a greater probability of heart attack and whatever. So we need to maintain an equilibrium, and that is homeostasis. So within homeostasis, we have what are called, let's look at a negative feedback loop. So there's an effector that then creates a stimulus. The stimulus then triggers the sensor triggers the control, and then it goes back into the stimulus. Now think of that in the same way as a thermostat. As the if you've got if you've got a thermostat that controls both air conditioning and a heater, if you set it at 73, let's say, if it's really cold outside, the temperature in the house starts to drop and it drops below 73, the heater will come on. And if it's warmer and warmer and the sun's out and it goes above 73, your air conditioner will come on. Well, in a similar way, that's what feedback loops are. So here, let's say your body temperature exceeds 37 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. 37 degrees centigrade, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So what happens when your body temperature exceeds 37? See, sensors, nerve cells with endings in they sense that. And those signals, and they're usually excitatory signals, go into your brain, into your regulatory centers of your brain, and those are usually your very lower brainstem centers, and basically a brainstem right above your spine controls your body temperature. What happens then is that your sweat glands throughout your body, you start to sweat. Now, sweat cools you off. Well, why? Because you're putting moisture out there on your skin, and air will evaporate that sweat, and that process will cool you. Very, very interesting. Nature is a wonderful thing. What are circadian rhythms? Circadian rhythms are like day rhythms. Any circadian rhythm is a cyclical change in your body functions and arousal levels, and they vary on a schedule over approximately 24 hours. Excuse me. Now, day people generally have early peaks in circadian rhythms. They wake up alert, energetic during the day, fall asleep early in the evening. Night people usually have later peaks, wake up groggy, and they're lively in the afternoon and early evening, and then they stay up pretty late. I think we're all pretty much aware of being a day person, night person, but now you know what it is. It's a differing circadian rhythm. We can really screw up our circadian rhythms, at least for a while, and that's in jet lag. And if you've ever had jet lag, that is, if you've gone from your current time zone into another time zone that's maybe 2-3 hours away or further, you will then, let's say, for example, right now, I'm sitting in Los Angeles area, that is, currently, and it is about 5 p.m. In New York, it's 3 hours later. So it's not 5 p.m., it's 8 p.m. in New York. So if I were to go from here to New York, which by the way is about a 5-hour flight for me anyway. So if I were to leave right now and go to New York, it would be 10 p.m. here. But in New York, by the time I got there, it would be 1 a.m. So now I'm in New York. It's still 10 p.m. My body still believes it's 10 p.m., but the clock that I look at in New York says it's 1 a.m. You should go to bed because you've got a meeting in the morning. That makes it difficult. And that's just 3 hours. Now instead, I'm in Los Angeles, and I go to Munich, Germany. There's a 9-hour change now. So even right now at 5 p.m., it's 2 a.m. right now in Munich, Germany. So going further and further away, either east or west, I find going east harder than coming back the other way. But when you get to these far away destinations, it takes a while to get your circadian rhythms readjusted. Shift work also can cause problems in circadian rhythms. One supplement that has been known to help with jet lag is melatonin, and it's a hormone produced by your pineal gland, and the pineal gland responds to light. The pineal gland is probably one of the last glands to be understood by us. It has been thought to be almost many things. Rene Descartes, famous philosopher, I think, therefore I am, came up with empiricism. He believed that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, having no other place or no other reason for it, he thought. Uh, so, shift work it can be problematic. And there's certain drugs out there also I know that you can prescribe to help you in transition shift work. But I know that melatonin works fairly well as well. Okay, now remember we're still talking about drives and motivation. So what are our internal factors in hunger? Like, what makes you hungry? If you what is that? Well, it's not just one thing. It's lots of things. And unfortunately, the marketing experts for McDonald's and other fast food chains have learned some of those secrets through us from psychologists, unfortunately, and they know just how to hit our buttons. But hunger is influenced, not determined by a full stomach. So if you have a full stomach, it strongly influences your hunger or lack thereof, but doesn't necessarily cause a diminishing hunger. The brain receives lots of signals from different parts of your digestive system and from your other sensory systems. And these systems come from your tongue, your stomach, your intestines, your liver, your pancreas. Not only that, but you're inundated by all of these olfactory signals and these gustatory signals, and even the way food looks and sounds is wonderful. And these factors also then determine our hunger. So you may have a very full belly, but your mouth may still be watering because that In-N-Out burger looks so good. All right, more internal factors. What are some of the brain mechanisms associated with hunger? Now, most of our knowledge about hunger comes from experiments with animals, and mostly with rats, almost always with rats. In fact, there's thousands, millions of rats raised strictly for research, and it's strictly above board and very ethical. They are, as long as they're not harmed or tortured or anything like that. So a feeding system, what is our feeding system? In our midbrain, lower part of our midbrain, we have a part of our midbrain called the hypothalamus. And it initiates eating when it's stimulated. So one experiment that we've done a lot is if we stimulate an animal's lateral hypothalamus, this will initiate eating. I mean, I'm stimulated either chemically or stimulated with a stimulation from an electrode. How does it work? Well, it's activated by a hormone called ghrelin, and this gets released by the stomach lining. So now, as I mentioned, the hypothalamus is the brain structure. It regulates a lot of aspects of our just very being: motivation, emotion, hunger, thirst, sexual behavior, muscle development, the change from childhood to adolescent, and puberty, everything. So be good to your hypothalamus. Notice on the graph here that there are two parts of the hypothalamus. There's one called the lateral hypothalamus, which is the hunger center, and then there's your ventromedial hypothalamus, which is your satiety center. That's when you're sate. That's when you're satisfied. That's when you are not hungry anymore. Continuing with these internal factors, we also have the satiety system, which is the ventromedial hypothalamus, and it terminates eating when stimulated. So you can imagine that all of the pharmaceutical companies have put great research and effort into finding a way to control or trigger the ventromedial hypothalamus so that one's hunger is not there. So this glucagon-like peptide is called GLP-1, and it's a substance in our brain that terminates eating. Now, part of this is what's called the paraventricular nucleus, and it's also located in the hypothalamus, and it keeps blood sugar levels. That's a interesting one. Blood sugar levels steady by starting and stopping eating. Okay, so that you don't going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So that's your paraventricular nucleus. We talked a bit about neurotransmitters, and I mentioned neuropeptides, but they are substances in the brain that initiate eating. And again, now if we know that certain hormones and certain neurotransmitters can initiate hunger or cease hunger, that's certainly something that any and all of the drug companies are going to be interested in. And they are. So, how does the brain maintain weight, or can it? We have, and I don't want to say this as a fact because there's some scientific debate about this, and there's a lot of research that shows the relevance and supports the idea for a set point, and there's some that doesn't support it. But let's talk about it. The set point for fat is a proportion of body fat that's maintained by changes in hunger and eating. So it's the point at which weight stays at the same when you make no effort to gain or lose weight. So some will say, well, I'm having such a problem losing weight because my body is just hanging on to that set point. And that may very well be true. Leptin is the substance released by fat cells that inhibits eating. Or in other words, if there are enough fat cells, or if the fat cell density is high enough, then a substance called leptin is released by the fat cells. It says, okay, there's enough of us, don't eat anymore until some of us are turned back into energy. So that's another thing. So another way to control hunger might be to use leptin pharmaceuticals for that. So again, there's all of these different ways that we might think about controlling hunger through pharmacology based upon what we know about our own physiological and psychological self. Now we were talking about the internal factors back here. Okay, now we're going to talk about the external factors in hunger. Cues, lots and lots of cues. Signs, smells everywhere. On the road, in your car, on your phone, on your laptop, your cohorts walking by, everywhere. Taste is certainly an external cue, and tasty foods obviously stimulate eating and overeating, obviously. Let's talk about some other interesting characteristics about taste and hunger, or external cues. Something called taste aversion, and that's an active dislike for a particular food, and it is very difficult to overcome. Usually these taste aversions occur very early in life. I have a taste, of course most people do anyway, maybe, but I have a taste aversion for sour milk or anything that comes close to sour milk. So buttermilk will turn my stomach, just plain old buttermilk, real fast. Now, if it's in a biscuit, that's another thing, but just buttermilk in a glass, ugh. Bait shyness is unwillingness or hesitation by animals to eat a particular food. You may take a hungry rat and give them a particular type of food, and if the animal shows will show bait shyness if the animal is unwilling to or shows any hesitation in eating that food, even though the animal is quite hungry. Emotional eating also exists, and many of us don't know that. Myself, as a clinical psychologist, I've seen many individuals respond to depression either by overeating or by undereating. Their appetite just completely goes away and disappears. And then there's some interesting research in that area as well, and that's relative to how the anxiety within the depression affects one's appetite. Because anxiety will kill your appetite real quick. Emotional eating is a tendency to overeat when anxious or hungry or sad. Again, that anxiety, when you have anxiety, anxiety is a function of the sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system just completely kills your appetite, on close to completely. Cultural factors greatly affect incentive values for food. I mean, if friends and family are there eating, there's an incentive value to be part of them. So that's just social togetherness, because we are such social animals. In fact, I think we are the most social animal. That in and of itself, just being with others, is an incentive value if the others are eating and value food as well. In general, sweetness, fat content, and a large variety tends to encourage overeating. A smorgasbord is certainly going to invite more eating than a big cauldron of oatmeal. Same amount of food, probably quite nutritious with the cauldron of oatmeal. However, you can, if you're presented with one of those Las Vegas style smorgasbords, then that's going to be a different thing. You are going to overeat. And think about it, and this is why I put this image here. Look at the burger on the left. That's a USA burger, and look at the burger on the right. That's a French burger. I've been to France quite a few times, folks, and I've never seen a USA-sized burger there, nor in Germany, nor in Austria. Then we have what's called yo-yo dieting, and that's a dieter's body becomes highly efficient at conserving calories and storing them as fat. And that's what happens. If you go on yo-yo diets where you go up, down, up, down, up, down, you actually are practicing storing fat. So a yo-yo diet is nothing but by doing that, you are essentially destroying your ability to lose weight. Frequent changes in weight can dramatically slow your body's metabolic rate. And metabolism is the rate at which you burn energy or burn calories for energy. That's metabolism. It's burning of it. It's burning. It's basically the exact reaction, or the specific reaction is a change from something called adenine triphosphate to adenine diphosphate, and that releases a considerable amount of energy. Now, obviously, we have billions and billions and trillions of those going on every second. But that is the microcosm of metabolism. And that becomes slower as one goes on yo-yo dieting cycles. Behavioral dieting is weight reduction based on changing exercise and eating habits and not on temporary self-starvation. Do not temporarily self-starve. You will be hungry as you transition, but then as you slowly transition into a new moderated diet that one has motivation to maintain, that's the important part of this, don't starve. Just slip down to an alternate diet. It doesn't have to be a fancy diet. You don't have to pay $2,000 for it. You don't have to listen to Jenny Craig or any of these other people talk about it. All you have to do is reduce the amount that you eat in a proportional amount to the various domains of food that's healthy for you. Here are some helpful behavioral techniques. Get yourself committed to weight loss. That's called motivation. Maintained motivation. Exercise. Why? Not to gain muscle. Exercise creates metabolism. You have to burn energy. The energy has to come from somewhere. The first place it comes from is from free-floating sugar in your body, because that's the quickest thing to just grab glucose and turn it into energy. Next, it grabs glycogen from your muscles and turns that into energy. But then after a while, it's got to go to the fat. And that is a slower process. So you have to maintain exercise, regular exercise, a little bit every single day, and not just walking around the house a couple times, but some committed exercise. And learn your eating habits by observing yourself. Watch yourself as you eat. More, learn to weaken your personal eating cues. I mean, don't let them turn you on so fast. Quite frankly, I mean, I watch sometimes Comedy Central late at night, and they've every fast food and restaurant chain in the world is on has you on target there. Every commercial, 5-10 minutes, boom, 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 and it all looks great. Count calories. And it's very easy today to count calories. You can buy yourself a little $30, $40 scale that measures in grams or ounces, and all the food that you buy has calorie information on it, and know how many calories you're supposed to eat in order to maintain a desired weight. Try to be within a normal BMI, a green range, and certainly, of course, talk to your physician before you make any drastic changes like that, if it's a drastic change. Develop techniques to control the act of eating. Develop techniques like for example, if the food's put in front of you and you're all of a sudden your body becomes a dome over that food, and there's just all anyone could see is a few crumbs and some slobber flying out. Maybe that's a technique that one might want to moderate. Certainly avoid snacks. Chart your daily progress and set a threshold for weight control. That means if you get up to a certain a certain weight, it's time not to panic, but certainly to say, this is it. In fact, set that threshold and then tell yourself, they've even got scales today that will remind you of your thresholds that'll set it. There's a couple scales out there. I mean, if you're into this sort of thing, that will insult you as you gain weight. So, vocally. But consider that as well as some sort of a negative feedback. But then there are people that also have eating disorders. Eating disorders. Now, in both of these, what I showed are two women who are severely anorexic. I might add also that anorexia nervosa is one of the most difficult disorders, eating or otherwise, to treat. But anorexia nervosa is an active self-starvation, and it's a sustained loss of appetite. It seems to have physiological origins. But if you look at these, like here, you'll see that this woman is here, but she's looking at her. What she sees in the mirror is not what she looks like. She sees that. So what happens is there's a certain visual dysmorphia there. That is, but we know that control issues are involved. It's very, like I said earlier, very difficult to effectively treat, and it most likely affects adolescent females. I've not known a male with anorexia nervosa, but it's not at all possible, and it says it's most likely to affect anorexic females. And there have been 2 or 3 celebrities in the past who have died from anorexia, mainly because becoming that thin and allowing your muscle, your tissues to become that dysregulated will also cause a very high dysregulation in your ionic balance of your body. And that is a very dangerous situation, and you die. Bulimia is another eating disorder, and it's called basically gorging, and then you gorge, and then you follow by self-induced vomiting or taking laxatives, usually both. I personally am glad that I have such a negative reaction to vomiting that I'd never do that, simply because I hate to vomit. I can't stand it. This is also very difficult to treat. And this binging and purging can seriously damage your health and your teeth as well. It just ruins your teeth. And again, it affects more females than males. I don't think that's necessarily because of any chromosomal issue or genetic issue. I think it is imposed by culture, because you don't see this in other cultures. Eating disorders are on the rise, and among men, and it's due to this not weight, but muscle dysmorphia. And so I see guys take steroids. It really will screw you up. Muscle dysmorphia is an excessive worry about not being muscular enough, and a lot of men want less body fat and more muscles, and may exercise excessively. So even though these were primarily female disorders, now about 10% of anorexics are males, and 25% of bulimics are males, because of this muscle dysmorphia. So, as I said earlier, I was talking about how they have exaggerated fears of becoming fat, and they believe that they are fat when in fact the opposite is true. People with bulimia are obsessed with food and weight loss, and people with anorexia are, if you've look, it's total control. Everything has to be in the right order. It is an amazing process to observe. Unfortunately, the person is also challenged with considerable mental disorder. Anorexics often will be put on a weight gain diet to restore their weight, and again, it's very difficult to maintain this. This is essentially med management. It's trying to make sure that somebody stays on their meds. In this case, making sure somebody eats what they're supposed to eat every day. They've got to get up to a calorie. Most of us need to get down to one. A person with anorexia needs to get up to a certain calorie threshold every day. We treat this usually with cognitive behavioral techniques. There are a lot of different branches of cognitive behavioral therapy, and we will talk about different types of therapy in our last lecture together. Now, thirst is something that is really essentially cellularly driven. When water is lost from fluids surrounding the cells of the body, we have what's called extracellular thirst. Whereas intracellular thirst is when fluid is drawn out of the cells because of increased concentration of salts and minerals outside the cell. Both of us are satisfied by drinking water. If you do anything, remember that a simple calculation is the 60-40-20 rule. Total body water 60%. We are about 60% of our body weight is water. If you weigh 100 pounds, about 60 pounds of that's water. Intracellular fluid, of that 60%, or not of that 60%, or 40% of your body weight, that is intracellular fluid, and 20% of it is extracellular fluid. Or in other words, 20% of your body weight is floating around outside your cells. 80% of it is in your cells. So, for example, when you go to the bathroom to relieve yourself, that would be extracellular fluid. You probably weigh less when you're done. Let's talk about pain. Pain is not a homeostatic drive. It's not a drive. So to avoid pain is not a drive either. It is maybe the desire, some people's desire, most of us, but it is not a drive. it is an episodic drive. In other words, it arises only from an episode. It's not something that we aim for or toward, but it arises only when bodily injury takes place or is about to occur. So what is an episodic drive? It's a drive that occurs only in response to distinct episodes. It's like a subroutine that all of a sudden suddenly kicks in. So it is not a homeostatic drive like everything else that we've talked about. Okay, hey, let's talk about sex. Our sex drive is the strength of one's motivation to engage in sexual behavior. A lot of people don't believe this. Sex is not, or at least for an individual, is not necessarily to survive. Now, obviously, it is necessary for our species to survive, but for an individual, you don't have to have sex. You have sex your entire life, you will still survive. It is not necessary for survival. Some more definition here. Estrus is changes in sex drive in animals, which creates a desire for sex, and we call that heat in females. Cats in heat. Estrogen, as I'm sure many of you know already, is a female sex hormone. Androgens are male hormones, like testosterone is an androgen. Non-homeostatic drives are independent of body need states or physical deprivation cycles. So, okay, let's have a summary on the influence of sexual motivation. Biologically, biological motivation it is associated with sexual maturation, hormones, and one's sexual orientation. Psychologically, it's involved with exposure to stimulating conditions like watching pornography or sexual fantasies, like sitting around daydreaming about something or somebody you want to be with. Then there's also socio-cultural domains around the influences of sexual motivation. Family, societal and personal values, religion, cultural expectations. So all of these factors and more mix into one's sexual motivation, but it is not an necessary internal biological drive. Stimulus motives reflect needs for information, exploration, manipulation, and sensory input. So according to something we're going to talk about called arousal theory, stimulus drives are homeostatic. What is arousal? It's an activation of the body and nervous system. So if anything, when we go back to looking at sex drives, in a way, a sex drive is somewhat of an episodic drive then, isn't it? That is, it seems to be driven by episode. There's also something called sensation seeking. And in fact, there's a considerable amount of research in sensation seeking, not only in relative to sex, but just relative to high-risk behaviors. It's a trait of people who prefer high levels of stimulation. So high sensation seekers tend to be bold and independent and value change, and low sensation seekers are orderly, nutrient, and giving, and enjoy the company of others. This is I often show students the Yerke-Dodson curve in almost every course before they take an exam, because I want to show them that the Yerke-Dodson curve is valuable and applicable in many, many situations. You see here the vertical axis is performance, and the horizontal axis is one's level of anxiety. Now let's take a test. If you're really just too confident about it, you're laid back and you don't really study, and I'll worry about it when I get there, blah blah blah. Your level of anxiety or your performance is in here. Okay, so let's say you're right in here. Well, your level of stress is in here, so your performance in this zone is going to be lower than if you optimize your anxiety. And anxiety doesn't mean worry. Anxiety could mean focus. because that's very valuable in test taking. So it could be simply focus. You exert energy, mental energy in focus. So that's what it could be. It is not necessarily anxiety, fear, or worry. So at this point, we see an optimal production of performance right here at this peak. But as one becomes more anxious, more anxiety, more panicked, and right down here, this is where you start seeing people choking even and panicking and stopping and cannot perform. I've had people just walk out, hand in an exam. They can't do it, even though they knew the material. As I was talking about test anxiety, it's a mixture of high levels of anxiety and worry. And generally speaking, it's called performance anxiety. It's performance anxiety, and not for another person or others. It's for you, how you are performing, how you're worried about you and how you perform. And in that, we see sweating and trembling. You get a stomach ache and rapid breathing. It is not a pleasant experience. How do you reduce test anxiety? Many of you, I think all of us have one degree or another experienced test anxiety. Breathe. That's the first thing. When we become anxious, we forget to breathe. And in fact, if you've ever taken any courses or anything about meditation, that's the first thing they tell you. Breathe. And try to get rid of your negative thoughts. Don't think about anything that you need to do or didn't do or want to do or can't do or anything like that. Don't do that. Fill your head with positive thoughts. I'm not going to go through the rest of these. You can read them, but and they make a lot of sense, obviously. But it is very important to reduce anxiety prior to and during a test, and increase your focus. And one way to do that, of course, as far as reduction of anxiety, is to breathe. Now, how to increase your focus? That's another issue. What are social motives? Social motives are need for achievement and a desire to meet some internal standard of excellence. Now, that's that one little desire to meet some internal standard of excellence is a nice little simple sentence or phrase, but it is really quite complex, and it involves a lot of cognitive systems, developmental systems that unfortunately we can't treat right now. But the need for achievement, what is it about somebody who has to achieve? Getting an A- isn't enough. Getting a 98% on the exam, no, going to argue for that extra 2%. They've got to be excellent. There's also a need for power, and that's a desire to have a social impact or control over others. A psychological theorist back in the earlier part of the 20th century was named Abraham Maslow. And in Abraham Maslow, as Maslow kicked off a type of psychology and psychotherapy called humanistic psychology. So humanistic, and there's still quite a few humanists actually a humanist society that is somewhat centered around Maslow and Carl Rogers. But under Abraham Maslow's hierarchy for human needs, he believes that we all have needs and that we must develop through those needs in order to be complete humans. And we start out with basic physiological needs. That is, we need just to be safe. I mean, we need to be warm. We need to be in a safe environment so that we're not going to get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. We need to have food and water. All right, there's the clear, most basic of the physiological needs. And then above that, we look for safety and security. And then we look for, then come in our social needs, our love and belonging. And then our need for esteem. Self-esteem, and self-esteem comes in until we finally get to a point, according to Maslow, and not all of us, in fact, very few of us get to this point of self-actualization. Uh, that is a discussion for developmental psychology and history of personality psychology, self-actualization. Lower needs tend to be prepotent or dominant over higher needs. That is, they take priority. You gotta eat right first before you're worried about your self-esteem. So basic needs are what are called deficiency motives, or in other words, if you don't have enough of it, then you are motivated to get more. Then there are growth needs, which are higher level needs, and they're associated with what I mentioned earlier, the self-actualization. Meta needs are associated also with impulses for self-actualization, and what humanists call the syndrome of decay, which is a state of despair, apathy, alienation arising when meta needs are unfulfilled. So again, cast your eyes upon Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you remain in this field of psychology, and especially in studying development and in studying personality theory, you'll certainly go over Maslow's hierarchy. There's not a lot of, the research behind Maslow's ideas and concepts, as well as humanistic ideas, humanistic forms of therapy, doesn't pan out, or in other words, it doesn't really show or demonstrate, the research that is, that the outcomes are any better than if you hadn't gone to any therapy at all. So there's a question, but it feels good. It feels good. And that's one of the problems with a lot of therapies is you go in and it feels great. While you're there, you leave and you go, wow, I didn't realize I thought that and so on. But then the next day you still feel badly. So it's not really when we talk about outcomes or what reduces symptoms, that's very hard, and by hard I mean definite quantitative research that has shown very promising results. What are intrinsic and extrinsic motivations? And we've been talking about this all along anyway. We're going to just sort of a review. So we see intrinsic motivations. And again, though, but now this, though, is cast in the light of humanistic psychology. So intrinsic motivations to the humanist are a sense of achievement, curiosity, and interest and pride, versus extrinsic motivations, money, grades, praise, exams, career, and so on. And the one of the issues with theories or composites, I don't even call it theories, composites like this, is that this appears to be nice, but then can you take this and can you generalize it? Does it have what's called, first of all, it doesn't really have a lot of internal validity. That is, in terms of experimentation, it doesn't really pan out. But then external validity points to that which you could generalize. If it's true here, it should be true over there. It should be true in another place, with another people, with another culture, in another time, with other experimenters, and so on. That's external validity. So this seems to you've got this intrinsic motivation and this extrinsic motivation that's put forth by humanistic psychologists, but we may in fact feel this is quite true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Intrinsic motivation coming from within, not from external rewards, and it's based on personal enjoyment of a task or activity. And certainly there's a certain amount of intrinsic motivation in doing something you like to do. But is that explained via a humanistic concept, or is it another? Are there other factors that are more closely associated with the interaction of cognition, affect, and behavior? Intrinsic motivations based upon obvious external rewards, obligations, or similar factors. We talked about creativity before. People are more likely to be creative when they are intrinsically motivated. So what are some creativity killers on the job? Working under surveillance, having somebody looking over your shoulder, working to get a good evaluation, working based upon what somebody else wants rather than, and how somebody else wants you to do it rather than how you would do it. Working mainly to get more money is really a creativity killer in many cases. Okay, now we are at emotion. Emotion is a state characterized by physiological arousal, changes in facial expressions, gestures, posture, and subjective feelings. What is an emotion? It's not more of a what, but a combination of different things or of different factors of one's condition. And emotions are linked to adaptive behaviors. Many times, and I'll get this in now and then later, we believe that our thoughts are caused by our emotions. That is, if you feel bad, you immediately start blaming. If you feel bad, that you immediately start to blame that the feeling caused something you're thinking about, which is bad. Whereas in fact, it's the opposite. The thinking causes the emotion, but the thinking many times is fast and or out of your awareness. You don't think about walking, do you? That's because it is a procedural process, something that you learned a long time ago. And sometimes, many times, things that we learn, procedural, somatic memories that we learn very, very early, can still kick up negative emotions. So when we talk about that because I feel bad, I think bad, it's really the opposite. It's you think a thought will cause an emotion, not the other way around. Adaptive behaviors aid in our attempts to survive and adjust to changing conditions. So what are three components to emotions? Very important components. First of all, physiological changes. Heart rate, blood pressure, perspiration, other involuntary responses. So there's clearly emotional responses relative to emotion. A lot of that comes from a hormone that many of us are familiar with called adrenaline, and it's a hormone produced by the adrenal glands that arouses your body, can cause you to move faster and be stronger for a short period of time. Second component is emotional expression, which is an outward sign of what a person is feeling. And the third component is emotional feeling, and that is the private emotional experience, the thoughts that are associated with that feeling. Because our body, our autonomic nervous system, it can only create certain levels of anxiety and lack thereof up and down. We ascribe thoughts or associated thoughts to certain levels of anxiety or emotion, and those are the feelings. Those are the emotional expressions that we have, and that is how we ascertain or assess any given emotion. Positive emotions are usually processed in our left hemisphere of our brain, and negative emotions are usually processed in the right hemisphere. This is an all or nothing. Sometimes it's the other way around. There is a part of our limbic system of our midbrain, and it's called the amygdala. The amygdala, I think it's Greek or Latin, one of the two, it means walnut, because it's a walnut shape. So amygdala is part of our limbic system. It produces fear responses. It also produces rage and anger responses. So amygdala is involved in this processing of emotions, fear, anger, and pleasure. It produces and stores memories, emotional events, and responsible for determining what memories are stored, what memories are stored, and where those memories are stored in our brain. There's lots of experiments with amygdala, with the amygdala. Some portions of the amygdala, for example, you can ablate a rat's, or let's say a cat's amygdala, or not ablate it, but just shut it down for a brief period of time. And the cat will show immense fear of a mouse in the same cage. You can look those up on YouTube if you like. So how do our emotions affect the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, the autonomic nervous system? We talked about that earlier in the course. Autonomic nervous system controls our physiological arousal. This has two parts. It has the sympathetic division, which is the arousing part, and then the parasympathetic or calming part. And specifically, these areas are you can look at some of our features like eyes, salivation, skin, respiration, and so on, and determine which part, whether it's a sympathetic or parasympathetic system, that's in play at the time. Now, if a police officer pulls over a driver and looks at him, many of these states are caused by drugs, alcohol, and other drugs. And so eyes, salivation, skin, heart, well, they don't feel your heart, but there would be indication that there's some alcohol/drug use going on. So what is the autonomic nervous system? Is the neural system, and it connects with our brain and internal organs. Its activity is automatic, okay? We don't think about turning it off and on. It's automatic. The sympathetic branch activates our body for emergency action. This is the fight-flight. This is the fight-flight system. The parasympathetic branch quiets the body and conserves energy. Earlier, I talked about. I mentioned to you the effect or rebound effect, where you can have, let's say in this case, you have this strong sympathetic stimulus right here, and there have been young athletes who have just fallen over dead. Simply because they were so aroused, their sympathetic nervous system so aroused in playing a game, plus they had taken sympathetic nervous system arousing drugs like amphetamines and cocaine or whatever, that cranks that up even higher. Now, did that cause them to fall over and drop dead? No. What caused them to drop over and fall dead is as that starts to go to decrease, you have what's called a rebound effect. So there's an opposing parasympathetic response that goes on. What does the parasympathetic system do? It shuts you down. It calms you. But if it calms you down too much, it starts turning systems off, like your heart and your respiration. And so you'll suffer this sudden death. It's an overactivity, and the overactivity of a sympathetic nervous system can result in high levels of distress, first of all. But moreover, what I said earlier is that you have this parasympathetic rebound, and that's this reaction to a overstimulated sympathetic system. Lie detectors or polygraphs. It's Ben Stiller and Robert De Niro in a movie where Ben Stiller's marrying Robert De Niro's daughter, and Robert De Niro's a retired CIA operative or something. So he's checking out Ben Stiller there. But A polygraph is a device that records changes in your heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and something called galvanic skin response, or GSR. Actually, it's not even called GSR anymore. It's called EDR, electrodermal response, EDR. And um, uh, uh, all of these systems together, again, are autonomically activated. And we have learned that we can not voluntarily turn off and on autonomic systems, but to control them. We can control them. And that's really what meditation's all about. And if you're a spy or something like that, or if somebody's concerned about being on a lie detector and being found out, there's training that they go through so that it appears as if they aren't lying when they are lying. You can look that up also. Innocent but nervous people fail lie detectors, and calm liars pass. So there's something called the guilty knowledge test, and this is a series of multiple choice questions, and one answer is correct. Only the guilty person would know that answer. So a guilty person may show elevated responses to correct alternatives compared to other choices. So we know that. So we want to find out if you're guilty about something, and we could present one at a time. Let's say 4 or 5 different responses to you one at a time, and the one that, if you respond much more heavily to one than the other, it is probably because that means something to you, and usually that is associated with guilt. Not all the time, but sometimes. Now, I mentioned at the very start of this lecture how expressing emotions is almost universal among primates. Emotional expressions are evolved to communicate feelings to others. And facial expressions of fear, anger, disgust, sadness, surprise, and happiness are recognized around the world, everywhere. We also have facial blends. Now, the facial blend's a mixture of 2 or more basic expressions. So what are some of the differences in expressing emotions? Different cultures express or influence the expression of different emotions. And we have what are called publicly expressed and privately expressed emotions. So where one may be much more reserved publicly to express a certain, let's say, an elevated emotion of some kind, like anger, one might be publicly would be far less motivated to express an emotion rather than privately in certain cultures. Other cultures, it's quite okay to be angry in public, but in others, not so. Men in Western cultures are more likely to have difficulty expressing their emotions and experiences, called alexithymia. I've got a picture of Mr. Spock there. People with alexithymia can't name emotions. So they look at you and you look sad. Person doesn't know you're sad. Body language is also very indicative of emotional expression. Kinesics is a study of communication through body movement, posture, hand gestures, and facial expressions. General messages involve relaxation or tension and liking or disliking. Then there's something called the chameleon effect. And this is unconscious. I think we've all done this to one degree or another, unconsciously imitating postures, mannerisms, and facial expressions of others we interact with. And sometimes if you do that, and they'll think that you're mocking them. So you have to be very careful about doing that. But if you like somebody's particular mannerisms or expressions, you might do that even away from them because you like it. We can also detect lies through kinesics. so illustrators, not somebody who draws pictures, an illustrator, these are, or illustrators are gestures people use to illustrate what they're saying. So they tend to decrease if somebody is lying. So if some, again, people use these illustrators to illustrate what they're saying, and they decrease when somebody's lying. However, emblems, now get these, the difference between these two. Emblems are gestures that have widely understood meanings within a particular culture. And they increase when a person is lying. So what happens is that when we lie, what does the gesture do? The gesture really supports details that we're expressing. But if you're lying, maybe you haven't figured out all the details. So a good liar, in fact, increases the illustrators or keeps them the same and doesn't increase the emblems. There's something called the facial feedback hypothesis, and folks, this is true and it works. You see the woman in the on the left side, she's got the pen in her teeth, and she's gritting her teeth like that, and it's making the muscles in her face like a smile. So because the muscles are like a smile, your brain interprets that and says, oh, she must be happy. And there's this feedback that occurs, and you actually start to feel happier. On the right side, she's got the pen in her lips, not in her teeth. It creates the musculature, facial musculature of a frown. And likewise, that's true as well. What is a contemporary model of emotion? More definitions here. An emotional stimulus is judged as a threat or cause for emotion. So an emotional stimulus is a trigger to an emotion. So the appraisal gives rise to an autonomic nervous system arousal. There's also cognitive labeling, or in other words, what is that? We name it. There's some sort of adoptive behavior like, oh, the lion's chasing me, I better jump up this tree, climb up this tree. There are innate emotional expressions like fear and an increased sympathetic nervous system to run, and probably great increase in adrenaline to get up that tree, and emotional feeling, great fear. So that appraisal, oh, that tiger or a lion is coming at me, these triggers are many processes. That's just a small list. Each element of emotion may further alter emotional appraisal of the situation, like a facial feedback hypothesis. Like something that appears further away and coming at you appears dangerous, but as you see, let's say this person, let's say it's a person, and you see the face, and the face is not threatening at all, then it calms down. Emotional intelligence, and the idea of emotional intelligence is fairly new. People is what's that? But it is an important and real factor with us in our culture and in our society. Emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotions. And that is not necessarily true of IQ, intellectual quotient. Negative emotions associated with defensive reactions, and they tend to narrow our focus of attention, limit our ideas about possible actions. When you feel negative emotions, when you feel anger, when you feel even obsessive tendency, which is a negative emotion, that the focus goes inward, it's limited, and one ceases to be open-minded. Positive emotions tend to broaden our focus, opening up new possibilities and building up our personal resources. So under emotional intelligence, what do we have? We have self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And that is the end of our discussion, our lecture for the day. I stopped and I looked at empathy. Now, empathy uh, is such a strong component of emotional intelligence. And as we learn more and more about empathy, we see that it may even have very specific brain centers and even neurons called mirror neurons associated with that as well. Again, folks, Psych 1, and there's a million other psychs beyond it. Really, we're just scratching the surface. At any rate, I will bid you adieu and talk to you next time. Goodbye.